Welcome to the show. This week, I have an amazing guest. She is one of my wonderful friends from my NTI cohort with Jude Morrow, and we have really loved connecting with one another. And what we have found is that in our coaching businesses, we have a lot of similar experiences and conversations that we've been having with our ND clients. That's you guys. So we want to share today. My guest is Lex Harvey-Bryn. She is a neurodiversity coach, and you can find her at coachingneurodiversity.co.uk. She's also an upcoming presenter at the International Coaching Federation for their ND and coaching as her topic. She's talking about what it's like, what the differences are, and things that coaches should be aware of when they are coaching ND clients. And that's coming up June 28th in their Belonging and Inclusion series. But guys, Lex is powerful. She really is changing lives every day. Today in the Autistic Sex series, we are talking, Lex and I, all about identity, your sexual identity, and sort of this whole process for us as late identified autistic ADHDers. How do we navigate this? And what questions and questioning, because a lot of us are questioning. We don't necessarily know what our sexual identity is. We're sort of trying to figure it all out because we discover late in life, there's all these variations that we didn't know before because we didn't quite fit into just strategically male or just strategically historically female. And we had a lot of questions. So guys, join us and let's have this conversation today. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Carole Jean, founder and host of Mind Your Autistic Brain talk show and community. And you're about to experience the new way to thrive in life and relationships as a late identified autistic by unveiling who you are, how you communicate, finding your self-care plan from the inside out, and being the authentic creator of your best life. Get ready, because this is where we go against the mainstream, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to who we are in order to create a joy-filled, balanced, and more neurodistinct world. Welcome to Mind Your Autistic Brain. Lex, welcome to the show. I'm so excited you're here. Having this conversation with you is really exciting.
It's my absolute pleasure. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
So Lex, this is an area that you talk about a lot in your coaching with clients because this is a big topic. This is a really big part of the whole processing, learning that you have a different neurotype. And there's all these levels and layers to uncover. What have you found?
Oh, absolutely.
What have you found?
Absolutely.
The number one place most clients that you coach are starting with this? I mean, where does this conversation start?
I think predominantly it's from that masking for so long, from being unaware that you're neurodivergent, and we have so many inputs as far as whether it's religious context or the way we're brought up around, and particularly around sex, where rules get established quite early on. So things like sex is dirty or sex is wrong, or it's all very, very vanilla and very sort of functional. Have babies, get married, have sex, or who live happily ever after. There's such a very much there's a very boxed way of having a relationship with sex, and I think so often, me included, because I experience autism and ADHD, and having been diagnosed later in life, I was so confused and conflicted with all of these rules. I knew that it didn't fit my way of existing. I knew that there was something more, there was something different, but I felt that it was very wrong because it was outside of the realms of normal. All of those normal people that we strive to be like before we realize how sparkling and wonderful we really are. So it's something that's continued through my journey, not only through my journey of learning about my own neurodiversity, but then as I've gone into coaching and therapy, it's a theme that's carried on because it's so closely linked to identity. And one thing I've really noticed is how, as I say, for myself and for other people around me, is actually how much sexual expression links to our identity. And so it can feel quite constricting when you have sensory stuff going on, when you have preferences going on that might be outside of those realms of normal, and there's relationship constructs, and there's issues with intimacy that I mean, sometimes the function of sex is really understandable. If you just have meaningless sex, friends with benefits, all those sorts of things, the rules are really clear. But you cross that into intimacy, where there's a relationship and there's that expectation for more than just that act. It sort of kicks in with those nuances of communication and social confusion that we have sometimes. So there can be a lot of times where there's lots of questions about not just sex, but also intimacy and relationships and sexual preferences and desires and kinks, and those things can feel quite uncomfortable, especially when you're, so I'll just keep chatting away, but if you have, so when you also couple that with some sensory stuff, some people, it can feel quite uncomfortable because they feel this that they're sort of deviant somehow, because they like power play. What a wonderful place to be, where someone tells you exactly what they want you to do when you've got an ADHD mind that goes 1,000 million miles an hour. So submission feels, or a submissive role in a relationship can feel quite relaxing, because you know exactly what someone wants. And suddenly you go from sort of having to think of all of those thoughts, which stifles the ability to enjoy it yourself, because RSD kicks in and anxiety's kicked in and questions, and suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, what am I cooking for dinner? Oh, I'm doing this. And it's all so discombobulating, when actually all we need to do. So, but these questions leave people thinking, oh my gosh, am I strange because I like someone telling me what to do, or I like being choked? Because it's not necessarily that there's a desire to be killed by choking. It's just a deep pressure that just is quite comforting for us. And so, but when sort of the kink world hasn't been explored very well and is still quite underground and sort of quite naughty, it can feel really uncomfortable for people to go, own that shit. Sorry. And own that. And go, yeah, this is who I am, and this is what I enjoy. And that's something I see happen so often, and I feel very blessed that people are really allow themselves to have those conversations and ask me and have those conversations quite openly about their experiences of sexual. I'm not saying sexual dysfunction, but those curiosities and those questions that just no one can answer for them, because it still seems to be quite a taboo subject. But I'm so grateful and so happy to see that it's something that the world is starting to understand and embrace a lot more.
That is, I think it's such an important component to our humanity. I mean, to have this conversation, especially for those of us in late identified life, because just learning our neurotype is different has been such a huge jolt to our identity. And you almost experience an identity crisis, so to speak. And I love that you started with this one place, and that is masking. Because so often I think that is one of the biggest contributors, in my opinion, and with my research and work, to burnout. And that is the chronic masking. And one of those biggest areas where for myself and so many of my clients that I've worked with, experience this tremendous transformation of feeling empowered and energized within themselves, is when we start to work through that area of our sexual identity and our sexual preferences and our needs within our own sexuality. You know, that relationship we have with ourself, our own body, our own pleasure, our own sensory touch. And one of the things that you mentioned, and I would love to sort of expound on this, is when someone comes to you and we're starting to talk about, okay, I recognize that, you know, the societal norms and all of the masking that I've done in this conforming to what I thought were the expectations. Like, I'm a woman, so I should marry a man, and I should have 2 kids and a house and a mortgage and a car. And we should be, doing sports on the weekends and vacations and all the stuff that we've been killing ourselves for decades trying to meet these benchmarks. Right. But inside we were going, this isn't me. This doesn't make me happy. This doesn't meet my needs. I don't feel like this is me. I'm just showing up, playing a part. What have you found, or how do you usually guide people as we start to explore, like, well, sure, I find men attractive, but I also find women attractive, or I find non-binary people attractive, or maybe I don't have a sexual desire that I'm feeling. Maybe there's other components I haven't worked through yet. Maybe there's alexithymia. Maybe it just doesn't exist for me, but I do want to have an intimate relationship. I mean, how do we start to just navigate all of these questions, Lex?
I think one of the first places that it generally arrives from is that confusion around relationships, because predominantly there's always a level of disconnect in relationships with people when I first meet them. There's either that they can't maintain one, they're struggling to understand how it all works, how this big picture works, and obviously always the biggest thing that comes through is the intimate side and the sex side of the relationship and understanding that. But I think aside from sort of in addition to all of that, there's also things like relationship structures. So is it being with one person? Is monogamy the right way, or is there some benefits, or some would I prefer to have a sort of ethical non-monogamous relationship? What fits for you? So it's a lot to do with that unpicking of values and boundaries and how people want to experience their life. Because I always hear, and I'm sure you do, and I'm sure every coach that you've ever met hears over and over again, I just want to be normal. I just want to be normal. And I always ask them who I just want to be like everyone else. And I always, because I had the same thoughts and feelings, I'm sure you probably did too. Who is the normal person? Because actually now I realise that there is nobody that successfully does all of that other than what you see on Facebook, and generally we all know that when you scratch behind the surfaces of social media, it's never quite as it looks online. But we look at that and we benchmark ourselves. It's the same with pornography. We get a very skewed understanding of what sex is through pornography, but equally it's also an opportunity to understand and look at if that's something that you're into. So, but equally pornography is bad, it's dirty, and that's what we're taught, so we don't want to sort of delve into those things. So I think it's understanding where for me it's that unpicking of the boundaries, of the values, of the beliefs, of what you enjoy about life, and then deciding, I mean, do you want a relationship? Do you want that typical relationship? Do you want to get married? I mean, I've never got married because I can't stand weddings. I have to be honest. There's too much going on in those things to my liking. I can't get there on time, let alone sit there and doodle around and feel like a spare prick at a wedding all day. I can't cope with it. It disregulates me. But also it's a construct I never wanted to be part of, but everyone would always give me this sympathy. Oh, you'll meet someone one day. And I just think, will I? Oh my gosh, okay. Am I going to meet someone one day? Or I would get those sort of pity looks and be like, oh, he might ask you, and I think it's not them, it's me. I don't want to get married. It's something that freaks me out. And I couldn't understand why. Obviously now I do. Now I get it, because it wasn't something that fitted in the way my brain works and my values and boundaries. And one of the interesting things on my journey is that when I went through a breakup from a long-term relationship, and there was infidelity in that relationship, and when it happened at the time, it was never the act that bothered me. It was the betrayal. It was that promise that something wouldn't happen, and it did. It was the betrayal, never the act. So then it made me question in my own mind, like, is monogamy my thing? And then all of a sudden my brain was like, oh my gosh, I can challenge all the rules, because actually I get to make the choices now. And it was and then I found out I was neurodivergent, and it was like my whole world popped. And then exploring that, my own thoughts and feelings, and my own views on my own approach to sex and sexuality, I suddenly started to feel different about myself. I dressed differently. I felt more confident. I felt a little bit silly, and I loved it. And suddenly, some of those barriers that I had up around myself, I started to let go. I started to wear regular choice shoes all the time, because I just made me feel so great, I didn't care. And it's that confidence that I think being comfortable with sex and your own sex in a sexiness that just shines through and gives you your swagger, and because you can own your body and your feel good and those chemicals and those emotions that run through you on your terms, and that meets your needs. And it's always those nuances of well, is that right? What will my parents think? Or what will the next door neighbour think? Or what will the what will the parents at the school think? And those are always the questions, is that unpicking that rejection sensitivity dysphoria that kicks in, wondering if you're going to meet people's or fail to meet people's expectations. And suddenly you're in a big mind mess again, and then just go, okay, well, do you know what, I'm just not even going to bother, and stay in the same run. So the moral of the story, that story it's about unpicking all the masking. It's unpicking the rules that you've been living by, that you've been given. They're very rarely our own rules. They're ones that we've gone, that's how we're meant to do it, I'm going to do it that way. So unpicking all of those, and then deciding how people actually want to experience their life on their terms.
Oh, I love that. There's two questions that I never asked myself. And they're ones that I started asking myself in this process, and they're now ones that I help my clients ask themselves. And that is, what do I like?
Yes, absolutely.
Because that's one I never asked myself. What do I like? And then the next big one in that, and I think you're speaking directly to this, is what matters to me? What do I think of myself? Not what do other people think of me? What do I think of me? Absolutely. I mean, that's a powerful question. And most of us have gone for decades and never asked ourselves that question.
Yeah. How do you want to experience life? It's an incredibly powerful switch in sort of reframing of thought processes. Absolutely.
So Lex, as somebody may be coming to this space where they're starting to peel off those first couple of layers of masking, and they know somehow that their sexual identity, the one that they've aligned with up to this point, really isn't of their own choosing. It's something that maybe they just ascribe to because of the social structure that they live in, that they grew up in. Because that influences, who we are. And absolutely, just may have said, okay, I'm a white cis female, so that's just who I'm going to be in the world. How, but maybe that's not who I am. And I know on the inside, that's not my choice. That's not me. That's not really what aligns, so that there's alignment in my life, in my internal life, in my external life. How do we start to navigate that? How do we start to explore those feelings and those thoughts that we might be having about our sexual identity?
The first place to go is find somebody who can give you a safe, non-judgmental space to just talk about it, because we secretly, somewhere deep down, do know exactly what we want and need, but we might have buried it under such a lot of judgment, guilt, shame, that we actually need to start, like you say, taking those layers off. And we do know in our hearts of hearts what it is that's missing. And having, like I said, having somebody who can give you that space where you feel supported, where you feel that person genuinely gives a shit as well, that is going to hold your hand, obviously sometimes metaphorically, because we're sometimes hundreds of thousands of miles away from each other, but just give you that space and to ask questions, and that is able to ask you questions too, in order to draw out of you some of those thoughts that you might be having conversations with somebody that you have never had with anybody in your life. So that having that space and being able, because again, a neurodivergent mind loves to talk through things, to solve and to explore and to process. So that is, I would say to anybody who's just thinking, I just feel something's not quite there. This isn't a plug either, but this is just a true, honest place to go to, is somebody who can give you that space, who can give you that coaching and the questioning, and allow you to ask questions and ask if things are okay. Is this weird? I hear that a lot. Is that really weird? Or is this normal? And it's about being able to sort of have those really open conversations with people to find out what your normal is, because that's the other thing, is that there isn't a normal. We've just gone through lockdown. We've got a new normal now. There's a whole world that's different, and us as ourselves, we get to make the choices about how we want to experience our own identity. So so I would say that the best place to start is finding that space, finding that person who you trust and you feel safe with, to be able to ask those questions, and whether or not that's with a coach or finding somebody on an online community that you feel that connection with. I would say just find that space to be able to get all of those thoughts in your brain and start to let them flow out.
Oh, that is definitely a great place to start. The other thing too that I want to touch on for a minute, because I think this often gets in the way, and it's fear.
Absolutely.
We fear the judgment of other people. We actually sometimes even fear the judgment of ourselves.
And I think that's probably bigger than the external fear. I mean, when you look at, my paraphrase for rejection sensitivity dysphoria is the actual or the perceived failure to meet your own or other people's expectations. And so often it's our own expectations that we struggle with. I should be married by now. I should have children by now. Said who? You should be having great sex by now. You're in your 30s. I mean, we should have all that 20s crap, and we've got it all out of our system. We should be having great sex at some point. And why did we not saying that? Why are we saying I should be married? I should have a mortgage by now. I should have this. Who said? Why don't we say things like, I should be having really great sex, why am I not? Or I should be rocking my identity. I should be walking around with a blonde bob or a rainbow mohawk, because that's how I own my identity. We don't talk about those sorts of things. And it's, again, challenging that internal rule, those internal structures that we've created about what normal looks like. And equally, it can feel weird if you, especially if things like deep pressure, or anything kinky, that can equally come up with those. What if people think I'm strange? What if people think I'm weird? What if I actually would like to have multiple partners? Will people think I'm slutty? There's so many of those questions of what if the person thinks that, what if people judge me, what if they find out, and then all of a sudden we just shut down on it all again. So fear and guilt and shame, all of those things are almost co-concurrent when we're talking about sexual identity and sexual expression. But then in itself, a lot of those are fed from those external factors. So what if somebody at work knows that I like to be chained up at a weekend? Or what if somebody knows that I like to express my sexuality this way? What if someone realizes that I'm gay or bisexual? What happens if? And a lot of the times it's that's about sort of, again, unpeeling those layers and understanding where those fears actually come from. And if you've grown up in a highly religious household where sex is dirty, or we don't talk about that. So I don't know if anyone's seen that happen, but that's how my life was. We don't talk about that. And it was like the dirty word of the house, and it was just, you just did it to have the seed and the egg that made a baby. And it's like, heaven forbid anything else was enjoyable. It was almost repulsive. So it took me a long time. And actually it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I suddenly started to think there's got to be more to life than this, because this just isn't right. But I was also surrounded by people that sex before marriage and and the fact that it was just this expectation around me. And I see that happen an awful lot. Societal shame and sorry if you can hear something in the background, my dog's flapping her ears, so I do apologize if it sounds like a helicopter going off. It's just my poodle having a head shake. So fear does have a massive part to play, as does rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And I think that's also really important to have on the table, is around those fears, especially when you're in the moment. And also understanding we also come with quite a difficult understanding of intimacy, as I said at the beginning. And I mean, certainly from my my autism assessment, my assessor, the psychiatrist who diagnosed me for the first time used the frame willy windmill in my assessment report, because I literally said, if that, I'll explain. I should leave it a little bit longer just to get that chest of it. But literally when I was growing up, people could be, unless someone was doing a willy windmill in front of me, I had no idea that they were interested at all. So I also found that was a real sucker to my self-esteem, because I didn't think anybody fancied me, because I would be sitting at the bar and everyone would be like, oh, that guy's checking you out. And I'm like, no, he's not. No, he isn't. And they were like, he is. I was like, and I couldn't get it. And of course, I didn't know why. I just thought that I was strange. So the knock-on effect of self-esteem, which then can open you up to picking people who are just very direct and not making great choices. And then suddenly all these things can then lead you to thinking, oh my gosh, I'm just getting this all so wrong. So again, understanding some of those nuances about our communication and how we interact with the world from a communication perspective as well has a massive impact on how we develop and sustain, or not sustain if we don't want to, sexual relationships. So and what the rules are. I think that's another big thing that falls into that fear category of that, and shame and guilt is what's the rules around, are you allowed to have one night stands? Because I'm sure that's not allowed, or all those sorts of questions too.
That's such a big part of the discovery journey too, and just sort of taking time to check in with yourself. And that is just to allow the space to ask yourself some questions. Number one, are all the things that I believe about my sexuality and my identity, are they true right now? Are they, maybe they were true for me 10 years ago, but are they true for me right now in this moment?
Absolutely.
And being able to also just explore, because I'm always about being the scientist in your own life, and giving yourself
I love that. That's
permission.
such a great way of looking at it. Love it. Scientist in your life, definitely.
Put your sexiest lab coat on that makes you feel really sassy, and just start exploring. And, one of the things, and I want to talk about this just for a second, because I feel that sometimes media, pornography, images that we see in the world when it comes to our bodies, sensuality, what we are perceiving as being pretty or sensual or, sexy or whatever, that often, and I didn't recognize this, it took a little bit to dig to this, but those images, number one, it's all fantasy. It's not reality. Pornography is just like a visual fantasy. It's not the reality of what happens with our bodies. It's not the reality of what happens in actual sex. I mean, when we get
it definitely doesn't sound like any of the stuff that you watch on pornography.
I mean, folks, if we're going to get real about it, I mean, there's smells, there's sounds, there's touch, there's things that just like slide off into a different direction. And the older you get, the further south to go.
Absolutely. Squirt from all sorts of directions that might surprise you a little bit. You just don't know, do you? And those things can come as a real surprise and freak you out. So yeah, sensory stuff is massive. Yeah.
And just being able to openly ask yourself and give yourself permission and empower yourself to go, you know what? I might be, 50 or 60 years old. And as a woman, I've never experienced a vaginal orgasm.
Yep.
And just so you know, folks, it's like 20% or less of women can actually have vaginal orgasms easily. There's all kinds of things. And for the most part, we've lived scared of our bodies, scared of our performance level, quote unquote. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I know personally, and I think I know pretty much every woman I've ever talked to has faked orgasms for most of their life because they just weren't feeling it. And they felt bad, not wanting to tell their partner, well, hey, this isn't doing it for me, yet they seem to be really enjoying themselves. So you just finally get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm just tired of this and I'm just tired of trying. Okay. Oh, that was great. Thanks. And then you're just
absolutely.
Like, so
or sometimes just to get it to go to an end. come on, let's get to this race, let's get to the finish line. I'm just going to do a couple of oohs and ahs and hopefully you'll get the message. Yes. There's I did actually win a faking orgasm competition in Greece when I was younger, so that's like another claim to fame of mine.
Oh my gosh, that's like the best scene from When Harry Met Sally.
Yes.
For all of you who are at least in our generation, you know what we're talking about. If you don't, go Google When Harry Met Sally orgasm scene.
Yes,
you will see
definitely
how well women can fake an orgasm simply sitting in a restaurant.
But and again, there's also that expectation to do it because it's almost like that's the expert. And if you don't, it feels quite like, why can't I? And then it becomes an issue, and then it's a thought process like, why can't I do it? And then it becomes a thing, and suddenly it can feel under such pressure because you can't do it. And then that in itself can make it feel sort of quite uncomfortable. And the thoughts with an ADHD brain, the thoughts that you're having about, does my body look okay? Is everything all right? Am I positioned the right way? Is he enjoying it? Or is she enjoying it? And there's so many thoughts going on that actually it's almost impossible for us to sort of become locked into that moment and engage in that moment. But I think another thing that I just wanted to highlight is actually the realm, especially with neurodivergent minds, around sort of hypersexuality as well as the opposite of that. Because there's also that confusion sometimes for people who just don't have that desire and have always felt that they've had to meet other people's needs because it's not something. And how complicated that can feel is if you don't have sexual desire, the same way as if you're in a relationship and you're incredibly sexual, and then sometimes there's times when we just shut down and it's sensory, it's overwhelm, and that can be very confusing for partners or people around you that suddenly, well, that's different. What's going on? Have I upset you? Have I done something wrong? And it suddenly creates questions for us to answer, and sometimes we don't have the answers to that.
Oh, Lex, I'm so glad you brought that up because that really is such a big aspect of it. And, you know, I'm 48, so I can turn around and look at a significant amount of time behind me. and you look at that and, you know, I reflect on my relationships. I mean, I've been married twice, and I look at that and I was like, you know, there were so many times where I questioned, I really don't even like sex. I don't enjoy sex. I have no desire for sex. And when I look at that, I can now see there were some components that were influencing that for me. One was burnout. Burnout influenced that. I had no sexual desire when I was just in burnout. I was barely functioning. So, you know, when your sexual desire is probably going to be one of the first things that drops off.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The other aspect for that for me was also uncovering some things that I didn't know. And one of those was that I'm alexithymic. So there were times when maybe I was feeling all the feelings and lots of emotions and lots of sensations, but I couldn't work through them or process through them to really identify what they were. And I really didn't have the vocabulary within myself to identify what those emotions or feelings were. So for a lot of times, in sexual relationships and encounters, I felt disconnected. It was just like a rote physical act that I was disconnected from. And of course, you know, the ADHD part of my brain was thinking about like the grocery list or all the other things, you know, like what I was supposed to be studying, or gee, what is that piece of dust that I'm looking at on the fabric, you know, all of the things. Yeah. And you
oh my gosh, there's a patch of hair I didn't shave. All of those sorts of in the moment. Yeah, absolutely.
Or you're holding your breath, so you're holding your stomach in to kind of keep everything where you think it's supposed to be, and you're not really
to let your boobs jiggle too much. I don't know. That just might be my issue. I'm always like, I'm gonna harm you if I keep carrying on. Yeah. So yeah, forget that. All of those thoughts definitely are very real.
Like being able to recognize that the differences in our neurotype and in our physiological experiences, because we have neurodistinct brains and neurodistinct bodies. You guys hear me say this all the time. So our experiences in sex can be very varied and different, because there's also times where now I'm very in touch with my body. Sometimes I'm now experiencing multiple orgasms and sort of like in a wave. And I didn't even know that was possible. And, you can experience vaginal and clitoral orgasms. And for me, those are two totally different things. Those are
Absolutely.
two totally different experiences. They're not the same orgasm.
Yeah.
And, there's
but no
one
tells you this stuff.
Nobody tells you this
no
stuff.
one talks
and
to you about
know
this
what?
stuff.
There's also a place that I reached, which has been really phenomenal. And that is, I don't have to have, nor do I want to always have an orgasm during sex. Sometimes I just want to have sex for the intimacy and the connection. Sometimes it's just like the physical release because my ADHD needs that sometimes.
Absolutely.
And I'll just tell my partner, I'll look at him and go, hey, you don't have to work yourself to death or anything like that. We don't have to do anything special. I just need like a connection moment. And I'm not really looking for the big finish or anything. And it takes
I also find it quite
off.
regulating sometimes. Sometimes I find it quite regulating, sort of, and again, it might depend upon, I might overshare here, but being sort of pinned against the wall and that pressure and just, it's sometimes such a relief, and it's not even about, but the other person can feel under so much pressure to want, but you haven't come yet. Well, I'm cool with that. I had a great time. It's not all about the finish for me. Might be for you, definitely not for me. I totally on board. I totally agree with you there. It's the actual act in its entirety is not always, and actually sometimes I quite like that. It's a little bit of a build up for the carry on of flirting and the sexual chemistry going on between those times. So, and again, but no one lets you talk about these things. Nobody lets you talk about these things, and it's and ask those questions about, is it true? Is it real? It's just all of those things that you're reading Cosmopolitan. I don't know if that's even a thing still, but I used to read in Cosmopolitan and think, oh my gosh, I can't read that. That's naughty. So it's I understand. And I think another thing, you talked about connection, and I think that can often be if we feel a disconnection from our partner, whether or not it's a long-term partner or somebody that you're dating with in the short term. If you feel a disconnection from them, or if you feel that they've had an argument, it's very hard, or there's been something happened in the day and you just feel quite disconnected. You can not want to, and it can feel again quite uncomfortable, like it's a change, and it's unexplainable, but that other person can feel quite rejected, but you're just not feeling it for some reason, because that connection's there, because the communication, the nuances around that just are a bit wobbly, and we can't, like you say, can't verbalize what it is. It's just not today. Or being touched out, or some of those other sensory things that we have going on.
And that's such an important part of the discovery process in sexual identity, I think. And I love this because I think you and I have probably had some chats about this prior to this conversation here today. But, part of that is just simply trying something, and just because you try something doesn't mean that you're committed to that or that's who you are. It's the experimentation of, I'm allowing myself this space. I'm giving myself permission to try out, sex with somebody that might be bisexual. Try something out with somebody of the same sex. Try something out with, someone who's transgender that's interested in having sex with you. I mean, it's just having sex with more than one person, at a time. It's about whatever you're interested in or curious about that you feel really drawn to. Because like you mentioned earlier, if you really check in with yourself, what you were needing, what you're wanting. And sometimes and I'll just tell you, I mean, there's things that I've thought, okay, this seems really intriguing. And in my mind, this is like turning me on. And then you want to try it. You do it in real life and you're like, yeah, that wasn't quite what I was looking for. When it was like, It's like, okay, but you know what?
Next.
It's not a reflection on you being or not being something. It's not a reflection of you doing something or not doing something well. It's just data. And it's just like, oh, I tried that. It wasn't really for me. It didn't fit. And that's
learning
okay.
the limits as well. Yes. I mean, there's lots of, and again, there's when you look at the sort of the kink world, there's lots of great rules you can follow. I mean, there's limits, there's hard limits, there's soft limits, there's boundaries that you can push. And so again, for our brains, it's like really great. I find real comfort in that. I know, no, if you want to do that stuff, find someone else. I am not your girl. But if but I'm open to this. And and actually being able to be that free with your thinking is amazing. It's lovely. But equally, you know the rules. You know your rules. You've got your hard limits, and there's the places you're not prepared to go. But the one thing also, I just want to say, when you talk about what about having sex with yourself and having that, and exploring yourself that way as well? I think, and quite often that can be so indulgent for somebody, and almost like, again, it can be quite a big barrier for people to step over, is that it's okay to do that just on your own as well. And that can also be a door that's quite well closed, because it's self-indulgent, and there's no real point. Well, what's the point? I should just do it when I'm with somebody else. And that can also be quite a big barrier that I found, is people just being okay with the fact that they can do it themselves.
And the really great thing about the self-exploration with masturbation, or just not even masturbating, but just experimenting with touch and sensory stimulation and fantasy stimulation within your own experience. I mean, sometimes I have discovered something that I like simply through surfing through porn, and you find something that, because it is fantasy, or I love to read erotica. I really love good erotica. And, it's not always easy to find, but you can. And when that is fun, because you can find different categories of it, and you can read something and it kind of gives you ideas, and then you can imagine, and you can, sort of touch and just give yourself and set up sort of this sacred space for yourself. I mean, I don't even know if I call it that, or a sensual pleasure place for yourself, and just say, hey, this is time I'm giving to myself. And, that goes back to values and boundaries.
Yeah.
It's like,
absolutely.
What do I value? Do I value my health? Well, part of my health, because number one for me, my value wheel of top 5 is health. So for me, my sexual health is just as important as my, eating healthy and exercising part of my health.
Absolutely.
It's equally as important. So in that, I have to set a boundary within my time and my schedule in the week to say, this is just my personal sensual time with me. Like, I don't need to, I don't have to have somebody else.
Absolutely.
That's a big one.
Yeah, it's incredibly empowering. Yeah. And then, and absolutely right. It's the opportunity to explore, to see how you like touch. How do you like hard touch, soft touch, sort of feather touch? And that is a great opportunity to do that, when you don't have to feel you're having to tell someone else or ask somebody else, if you just want to explore those things on your own terms.
And I think, and as we are exploring sexual identity and just sort of giving ourselves permission to just even question, hey, is this really who I am? Is this truly where I am right now in my life? Is this who and what I am attracted to? And a lot of that just goes back to the foundation of just educating yourself on what's available. Because, for a lot of us, it's interesting. You start reading about queer, and you start really reading about polyamory and pansexuality and bisexuality and all these different varieties of sexual identification. And as you start to read and you learn more and you start to have conversations, you start to go, oh, I didn't even know that was a possibility. I didn't know that existed. I kind of feel that way, and that feels like in alignment with me. Now I have a word for it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Curiosity. Sometimes you just got to follow your nose and trust that sometimes it leads you to all the right places. But we become quite, I think that's probably a societal issue, though, is we become quite fearful of curiosity. We get told to stop asking why at very young ages. But equally, we should stay curious, especially our minds. Our minds want to be curious. We want to explore. And it's where our happy place is. It's where our enjoyment is. Oh, I love that. I think that's where we're going to stop, because I don't think it could get any better. It's finding your happy place, finding your joy, what that is for you. And it doesn't have to look like anybody else's, because here's an insight tip, guys. There's no such thing as normal, and nothing and no one meets any expectation ever.
Embrace your weird. The weird is the best part. I love it.
I love the weird too. Lex Harvey-Bryn, thank you so much for being here today. And if you guys love her as much as I do, go connect with Lex at coachingneurodiversity.co.uk. And if you have the opportunity, go check out on June 28th, her presentation at the International Coaching Federation, ND in Coaching. This is part of their Belonging and Inclusion series, and it is open to all people. It is open to the public. It is not just for International Coaching Federation members. Thanks so much for being here today and having a conversation about sexual identity.
I really enjoyed it.
I did too.
Bye.
If you are someone who likes to help people and share what has made a difference in your life, please share this talk show with a friend and on your social media accounts so that you can be the blessing in another late identified autistic's life. Be sure to tag me at Social Autie so I can personally say thank you. And to help keep the talk show ad-free, please consider becoming a one-time or recurring supporter through either Buy Me a Coffee or the Anchor podcast links in the show notes below. I truly appreciate your support. Thank you for being a listener, and thank you for adding your voice to our story.